What happens when God moves into the neighborhood? We'll be talking about that and other ways of thinking about the Latino experience in America with our guest, Noel Castellanos, on Good God. I'm George Mason. Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith and public life. I'm George Mason, and I'm pleased to welcome to our program today Noel Castellanos. Noel, good to have you with us.
Thanks,
he is
George.
From Chicago,
Yes.
And continues to be the president and executive director of the Christian Community Development Association there that you've worked with for some 30 years. Is that right?
Yeah, a long
Wonderful.
time.
A long time.
Yeah.
So, Noel, we live in Dallas and you in Chicago, but these are two major urban areas. And some of us get to these places just because we grew up there or we chose to go there for our job. But you made a very conscious decision to move into the neighborhood, you might say. So you've lived in the hood, as you like to say, for these 30 years. Say a few words about this decision that you and your family made to move into the neighborhood, and I think also some of the roots of it spiritually.
Right. Well, actually, I'm a Texan.
Yes.
I was born in the Valley,
Yes.
and 2 miles or so north of the border in a little town, Weslaco.
Weslaco.
And so when I was about 8 years old, my family moved to California. But my great-grandparents came from Mexico into Texas, and they brought my grandparents as dreamers. They were just children.
Before we even knew the name.
Exactly. And then my grandparents settled there, and my parents were born in that same little town. So we've been around a long time. And my parents were farm workers. They would travel all over the country. They were, born here, citizens, but still really lived that little bit of that marginalized reality economically and all.
Yes.
But when we got to California, it was my dad's sixth grade education. He gets a job at General Motors, which was an amazing stabilizing factor financially, where we moved more into the working class. So in a way, my parents had that opportunity to almost begin to experience the American dream a little bit. And in the middle of that, I went to college, but right before I went, I had an experience with Christ, and it was my football coach, American football.
Yes, American football. Okay, very good.
Right.
Yes.
That took me to this camp and had just a real, just an encounter with Jesus. But I remember on the way home from that camp asking, is this Jesus that I heard about just for white folks? Or is it for kids like me? Because I only saw like a few of us, And but that kind of began this faith journey where I got a college degree. My parents had begun to stabilize their relationships, although we had a lot of drama at home and all that. But I remember after making a decision to follow Christ, just feeling a very strong call to work in the Latino community. And I like to say that the first half of my life I lived in the barrio because that's where my parents were. Right. But the second half, it was a choice. It was a call. Right. And lived in San Francisco in the Mission District, on the east side of San Jose, King and Story Road, which is where the center of the Chicano movement was.
Right.
And then 30 years ago, I moved to another Mexican barrio called Little Village, or La Villita, and that's where we've been for all this time. Planted a church, did a community development ministry in that community, and then about after 10 years, I made the change to lead CCDA, which was instrumental in helping me go to Chicago with
Wonderful.
this. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, you like to talk about how God in Jesus is is in the business of teaching us about downward mobility.
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, that sort of starts with the whole incarnation to begin with,
Right.
the way where God chose to enter the world, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think this, it was really a Roman Catholic priest by the name of Virgilio Elizondo, who's from San Antonio.
Okay.
That he wrote a book called The Galilean Journey.
Yes.
And it really was an amazing kind of experience to read that book, because first of all, I had not read any Mexican American authors, theologians. And so while theologically there might be a few conclusions that we come to that are a little different, the work he did on connecting the reality of Galilee to the reality of Mexican Americans in this country. It's a little insignificant place in Palestine, and how it was not the center of power. It was a place that's experienced all kinds of intermixing with other cultures, religions, and so to be a Jew there was really important, and you had to really be serious about it, but always with the kind of the marker that other Jews, especially from Jerusalem, look down on you.
Yes, right.
And so
it's not hard to make the connection, is it, between
no.
those who are in power
Yeah.
and those who have the majority of the wealth in this country,
Yeah.
and just from an ethnic standpoint, mostly white Americans.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's a tension there.
Yeah.
You like to talk about also, I've heard you say that we've sort of sanitized salvation in our culture, that we've sort of shined it up in certain ways that we forget really what's at stake and how it comes to pass.
Yeah.
If we were to remember, if we were to really come to grips with it, tell us more about the direction that should take in our lives.
Yeah, I think that the making of a respectable Christianity, has really hurt us, I think, because as we begin to achieve a trajectory that leads to more wealth, more assets, more security, more power, all of a sudden we become very far removed from the place where Christianity started, in that marginal space, the Galilean kind of paradigm. But what you see is, the idea that Jesus spent all his time almost in Galilee. The only significant, he passes through Jerusalem when he's on his way to Bethlehem to be, his family does, in his mom's belly.
Yes.
But then it's, when he's crucified. And so the whole tension of the gospel story is a tension of a people and the religious establishment that should see, that what Jesus is talking about is, like they say, he spoke with authority, and his miracles and all. But in fact, what happens is he is a threat both to the religious establishment and to the Roman Empire, because they were calling him king. And
okay, but Noel, now you're getting political.
Yes.
Now you're getting into social and political kinds of things. Why can't you just keep it spiritual? See, because that...
Yeah.
I'm taunting you a little bit
I
here,
know,
but you know, this is what we struggle with, right?
Yeah. Well, I think what I love about the Bible is we see it as this sanitized, sacred book, but it's the story, of kings and kingdoms and wars and all kinds of craziness, sin, which is prominent, and so this backdrop is just part of the story, and I think the fact that Jesus is raised at a time of Roman occupation, we can't deny that. That's part. So what does that mean, right? Obviously, there is a temptation for in our day to make Jesus a revolutionary that's trying to establish the kingdom by confronting the powers and all. Well, in fact, so much of his message, if we understand the context, felt subversive.
Yes.
Okay, and so I talk about the cross being this very scandalous object of capital punishment, right? And so the idea, I asked myself, why would God choose that method to bring salvation to the world? Because we see salvation as the church is the steward of salvation,
right,
in a sense, right?
We dole it out to whom we wish.
Yes, yes.
And we discriminate based upon whether they seem respectable and good enough, right?
And we own the the image,
yes,
the cross, and the cross that we see today is usually a very shiny,
yes,
ornate object, unlike the Roman Catholic cross that's a crucifix,
right,
with the suffering Jesus still on it.
We have to look at him, don't we?
Right.
Look at the victim.
And so that, when you're in the margins, you see that reality. And so God comes and in solidarity with the broken humanity, he says, I'm not only going to say love the poor and you got to minister to the poor, but he becomes poor.
He becomes poor.
And he actually allows himself to be subjected to this criminal's death, kangaroo court,
yes,
just like a common criminal. And it's on that cross, on the place of execution, Golgotha, where hundreds and hundreds of people are crucified probably every year. And that is the place that Jesus decides to bring redemption and salvation for the entire world. I think that's a scandalous story,
right?
Right. And yet we kind of forget how unceremonial it is.
Yes.
But
this makes me uncomfortable because I am a country club Christian.
Yeah.
And I enjoy my life and my wealth and my opportunities and all of those sorts of things. I also have a conscience.
Yeah.
What do you want me to know? And people like me, Noel.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we care for our soul if we are going to claim the name Christian in a culture like ours?
Yeah, I think that we need to just recognize the predicament we're in as Western Christians, and just be honest about that. Like in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus announces his ministry, he quotes from Isaiah 61, right? I've come to preach good news to the poor, and then release the captive, bind up the brokenhearted. There's a one line that says to open the eyes of the blind.
Yes.
That is not in Isaiah 61. Okay, so if you go back and study that passage, I've often asked why. What's going on? Well, if you read the Gospel of Luke, you see all these encounters that Jesus has with very, very sinful and untouchable people, and they're usually very inviting.
Yes.
And they're not confrontive.
Right.
The confrontive encounters are with religious leaders, and so I think what I've begun to really believe that the blindness reference is to kind of make us aware that when we think we have the answer, and when we think we're the ones that steward the grace of God, we can really be blind to what He really came to do. And so I think that for me, the more we know how desperate we are for the grace of God, the more we're generous with our life. Good. Okay, and so I think what I have to avoid. Okay, we lead a movement of thousands of people that have given their life to live in poor neighborhoods. Right. But that doesn't make us closer to God. That doesn't bring salvation in and of itself, okay? it's an invitation that I feel that God gives to us to say, look, here are my priorities, and I've demonstrated them. Because can you imagine, like, when 2,000 years ago, that did God know there'd be 7 billion people on the planet right now, and the majority would be poor?
Would be poor.
You know? So that invitation comes, and then the Holy Spirit moves in our hearts and says, that's what I got to do.
Okay, let's pick that up after a quick break. I want to talk about this a little more, about this this notion of the discrepancies in our world between the rich and poor, and also those who are coming to our country with aspirations and are finding great frustration today.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
Interfaith Housing Coalition Dallas provides transitional housing for families with access to case management, employment assistance, budgeting assistance, and counseling for children and teens. For more information and to support Interfaith Housing Coalition, visit the website or call.
Noel, you were talking earlier about your parents and your grandparents and great-grandparents, and this growth that they were able to achieve, where they were able to have a better life than their parents and grandparents. And I know that in the Latino community, there is a feeling of whiplash that people have about are they welcome or are they not? Are they needed? Are they wanted or are they not? For example, going back to World War II, in building this country, there was a tremendous need for workers, and the railroad and the like. Our industrial world was built. Much of America was built by the braceros, right? That is to say, the day laborer, the workers, and from Mexico, how many came, would you say, over that period of time?
I think it was probably at least a couple million, which back then was a lot of people.
But this program ends about 1964, right? And so now there is a kind of back and forth. Whenever the economy needs more workers, we sort of lighten up and we say, well, let's find a way. And then when other cultural things begin to happen, we begin to tighten up. We're in a real tight place right now about immigration policy, refugee status. We're down at the border, and we're now dividing children from their parents when they move in. So, I think it would be helpful for people to hear from a Latino what it's like for people who believe that they have opportunity to come here. Why do they come? Why do they come even because they can't wait illegally? They come across the border seeking jobs. What's happening in the human heart and in their families to drive them to do so?
Yeah, I think when you understand that every day there's about 80 million people migrating throughout the world.
Yes.
I mean, migration is a common reality, and it's because of poverty, because of war, because of political persecution. It's also because of the human spirit. Wanting to achieve aspiration, which is what a lot of our country is built on. And so that reality means that it shouldn't surprise us that with the close proximity to the southern border of Mexico and Latin America, that, boy, there's going to be movement, and there's going to be people that are going to come to seek a better life. My parents came because it was easy to come. My grandparents, great-grandparents. I'm here, and being here in Dallas, I think about the year of 9/11.
Yes.
Okay, 2001, I think.
Right.
We had our conference right here, and we had a hotel that we had booked up, and we had to get out of it because of making changes. There's a act of God provision and war, and so we were able to do that. But if you remember, there was some really historic talks between a former governor of Texas and a former governor of Guanajuato, a neighboring Mexican state.
Right.
Vicente Fox and George Bush,
Right.
who both understood and knew the realities of the Mexican migration and the need for labor. They were about to overhaul and make a big change in immigration, and
Right.
9/11.
The guest worker program.
Yep.
Yeah.
9/11 happens and it
Everything's
blows up.
up.
It
Yes.
blows up. And now terrorism,
Yes.
the fear of terrorism.
course.
But I think, you mentioned the Bracero program, but it's when you think about 50 to 60% of all agricultural workers are undocumented.
Undocumented. Yes.
Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
So there's like a friend of mine likes to say, there's a sign at the border that says, on one side, keep out.
Yes.
And then you turn the sign around, it says, help wanted,
Yes.
because we need workers.
Right.
And with so many proposals over the last, since the Reagan amnesty program, I don't know that we lack how to fix the system, but there's a lot of politics, okay?
Yes.
Like one of the big factors that we have to really reckon with is that there's an economic kind of advantage to undocumented immigration.
Right.
Because many people can hire folks at lower wages, they can cheat them of wages, they can take advantage, not provide any health benefits at all. And I was in Los Angeles recently talking to a group that advocates for domestic workers. $25 million a week in wage theft for the domestic workers in Los Angeles, just in that one city. So what that means is, we basically have this underclass of 12 million people that are in our country, and I think we should be concerned that we have a class of people that in our country that we don't quite know who they are. They have some kind of social security number. They're contributing to that social security.
But they'll never receive any benefits from
exactly.
it. Right.
Which
right.
a lot of people.
Which actually helps the Social Security system, but hurts them.
Yes.
So there's arguments that are logical on all sides of this, and there's not really two sides, right? There are many sides to it.
Right.
There's the religious argument about the dignity of every human being and our neighbors and welcoming strangers, and then there's the economic argument that actually can go both ways. We need workers for our businesses, but we're also ending up, we do end up paying for hospital visits in the emergency room and public education and those sorts of things. There's all the social implications of it as well. But can you name, in the Latino community, what's the greatest hope for change? If you could say, in the Latino community, if America would do this, it would be the greatest boon to our self-esteem, to the opportunity that we have. What would be the outlook?
Yeah, I ask that question to immigrant men and women all the time.
Right.
What do you want America to know?
Right.
I did a walk from the border of Mexico, U.S., Tijuana to downtown L.A., 150 miles with about 300 people.
Wow.
Just not to protest, but to
learn,
go in solidarity with our immigrant brothers and sisters that have to make a journey like that.
Right.
And I think this one gentleman who was working in landscape, I saw him and went and talked to him, filmed him. He said, what I want is give me the opportunity to work, and don't think that I've come to take from the United States. I've come to give the United States. Okay. I mean, that's the overwhelming sentiment I get from folks that I meet every day. We're here to do better, to work for the welfare of this country, and we're not asking for a handout.
Right.
We don't want a handout.
Right.
And we have to be honest, in our community, we have a clinic that we fund, through some insurance, government funding, and private funding, but we take care of many undocumented folks that come to the clinic. They have to pay something, okay? It's not that we don't know how to, we're talking about 12 million out of 300 million people.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't add up. The fear,
Right.
the kind of the scapegoating that we put on this group of people that mostly, like, even as we're here, every hotel worker that I've seen is an immigrant.
Yes.
The person serving us coffee at the Starbucks is an immigrant. My Uber driver was an immigrant. It's just everywhere. The restaurant
country
workers
would be at a standstill.
Absolutely.
If we close the borders. Okay.
Yeah.
So this program is called Good God. So we're talking about the common good
Yeah.
and about how our faith really motivates us to see the world differently. You talked about blindness earlier. The first thing is to actually see the world as it is, right? And then to imagine how the world might be.
Yeah.
So in the Jesus story, we have plenty of language in the narrative of refugee status, of his being cared for by others, of moving across borders, that sort of thing. When you need the most inspiration to keep your hopes built up, what do you go back to? What do you rely on in your faith narrative?
Yeah. I think it's the core reality of God's constant love for those that nobody else loves, the rejected, the marginalized. Because what that says is that, there's no one that's outside of God's care and redemption and that that's the spirit that he's put into us.
It's not optional. It's not that God came to us to establish a bulwark of first all of the respectable people and to create all the institutions that then would go about the work of including others. It actually starts on the margins, right? And so God comes from the margins in, and our redemption is really found in acknowledging that and being in partnership with.
I think the vision is that vision of this new community, this new beloved community where it doesn't matter what status economically you are, what color you are, what language you speak, that we because we are all under the stewardship of God and the lordship of God, we're able to steward resources, share with one another, create opportunities for each other. It's not a handout. I think what we don't see in Scripture is this charity. Okay, I am going to feel good about myself by seeing you as lower than me, and I'm going to, pour you. It's a family. It's a familia, and we get to love each other. We get to, experience the ups and downs of all the relational stuff that has to happen. But I just think it's the ability to experience the goodness of God. I'm actually writing a new book right now.
Okay.
Yeah, reading the Bible through Mexican American eyes.
Well.
Yeah.
All right.
That'll be the subtitle. But one of the concepts I talk about is a word pachanga. Okay, which means like a party, a fiesta.
All right.
And that's what God is ultimately leading us towards, and you see all the parables about the banquets and the weddings, but pachanga is this. It's the image in the community is it's like the quinceañera, the wedding. Right. It's a party that doesn't end very soon, right? And everyone's got food, everyone's invited. You come, and it's I think what part of God's redemptive purposes and work is leading us towards is to be able to celebrate His goodness, to be able to celebrate that we have a good God, right? That's big, that, there's enough of stuff for everybody. There's enough, love to go around for all of us. And I am at a point where I don't like titles that much anymore, except, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus de Nazaret. Jesus
of Nazareth.
I mean, who I find hope in him. I find hope in his whole story, his how he lives, how he loves,
Good.
how he sacrificed himself.
Thank you.
I think that's great news.
Well, it is great news. And Pachanga?
Pachanga.
I've got to get my pronunciation down.
Yeah.
But even before I can say it, I know it's a party.
Yeah.
And we're all invited.
Yes.
And let's begin it now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Noel.
Yeah.
Glad to have you with
yeah.
us.
Thanks.
Okay.
Interfaith Housing Coalition Dallas provides transitional housing for families with access to case management, employment assistance, budgeting assistance, and counseling for children and teens. For more information and to support Interfaith Housing Coalition, visit the website or call